September 14th, 1944. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The cattle cars hissed to a stop on the rail siding, brakes screaming against cold iron. Inside, 43 men sat in darkness, their hands still bound with rough hemp rope, their uniforms stiff with salt and dried sweat from 3 weeks at sea. Private First Class Takeshi Yamamoto pressed his forehead against the wooden slat, trying to glimpse what awaited them through the half-inch gap. He could see pine trees, endless pine trees, and beyond them, low barracks painted the color of sand. This was America, the land of demons. The doors slid open with a metallic crash, and autumn light poured in. Yamamoto flinched. They all did. For a moment, no one moved. The air smelled wrong, too clean, too cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something sweet he couldn't identify. Nothing like the rotting jungle of Saipan, where he'd been captured 6 weeks earlier, with a bullet through his thigh and his rifle long since lost to the coral mud.
"Out! Everyone out!"
The voice barked in accented but clear Japanese. An American soldier stood on the platform, a Thompson submachine gun slung casually over his shoulder, his expression neither cruel nor kind, just tired. Behind him stood 2 other guards, both looking barely older than 20, their helmets painted with fresh olive drab. Yamamoto was the first to stand. His leg still throbbed where the Navy corpsman had stitched it aboard the transport ship. He stepped down onto American soil, expecting to be struck, expecting boots and rifle, butts like the stories he'd heard about Soviet camps. The guard simply pointed toward a processing building. "Line up. Single file. Keep your hands where we can see them." The 43 men shuffled forward. Yamamoto recognized some from his unit. What remained of the 43rd Division after the Americans had shattered their defensive line with a fury of naval guns and flamethrower tanks. Others were strangers, Navy men pulled from sunken destroyers, an artillery sergeant who'd lost both his crew and his mind somewhere in the Marianas, a signals officer who never spoke and whose left arm ended at the elbow in clean white bandages. They had been told what to expect. Their officers had made it clear before the last Banzai charge, before most of those officers had died screaming into American machine gun fire. If you are captured, you will be tortured. The Americans will starve you, humiliate you, parade you through their streets like animals. You will wish for the death you were too cowardly to take yourself. Yamamoto had believed it. They all had. Why wouldn't they? The propaganda films showed American soldiers bayoneting prisoners, laughing as they did it. Radio Tokyo broadcast testimonies from survivors of American camps, where men ate rats and died by the hundreds. So, when they entered the processing building and saw the tables laden with folded blankets, bars of soap, and what appeared to be new clothing, Yamamoto's first thought was, "This is for someone else, not us." A U.S. Army lieutenant stood at the head of the room, flanked by a Japanese, American translator in uniform. The translator was a Nizi, second generation, his face softer than the hard, angled features Yamamoto knew from home, but his Japanese perfect, textbook clean. "Gentlemen," the translator began, and the word alone sent a ripple of confusion through the prisoners. "Gentlemen, not dogs, not cowards. You are now prisoners of war of the United States Army. Under the Geneva Convention, you will be treated with dignity. You will receive adequate food, shelter, and medical care. You will not be tortured or abused. If you cooperate, you will be safe here. Do you understand?" No one answered. Several men stared at the floor. The artillery sergeant began to laugh quietly, a sound like broken glass. The lieutenant said something in English, and the translator nodded. "You will now be processed. Remove your uniforms and personal effects. They will be catalogued and stored. You will shower and receive clean clothing. Then you will be fed." Fed. Yamamoto's stomach, which had been a hard knot of fear since the train doors opened, suddenly reminded him it had been 18 hours since the last meal. A tin cup of watery broth and a rice ball the size of his fist. He glanced at the man beside him, a young conscript named Hideo, who'd been drafted from a Hokkaido fishing village and had never wanted to be a soldier at all. Hideo's eyes were wide, unblinking. "It's a trick," Hideo whispered in the dialect of home. "They'll kill us in the showers." But the showers were just showers. Hot water, the first hot water in months, pouring from steel nozzles in a tiled room that echoed with the sound of water and uncertain silence. Yamamoto stood under the spray until a guard tapped his watch and gestured for him to move along. They were given uniforms. Not Japanese, but dark blue denim with the letters PW stenciled on the back in white paint. Prisoner of war. The fabric was thick, sturdy, unpatched. Better than what Yamamoto had worn even during basic training in Osaka. And then they were led to the mess hall. The mess hall was larger than any building Yamamoto had ever eaten in. Wooden beams stretched overhead, supporting a peaked roof that seemed impossibly high. Windows ran along both walls, letting in the pale September sunlight. The room smelled like cooking meat and something else, a dark, sweet, bubbling scent that made his mouth water involuntarily. Long tables filled the space, each one flanked by benches. At the far end, American soldiers in white aprons stood behind a serving line, steam rising around them like morning fog on the harbor. Several of them were talking and laughing with each other. One was smoking a cigarette, dangling from his lips as he flipped something on a griddle with a casual expertise that spoke of 1,000 repetitions. The guards motioned the prisoners forward. "Grab a tray. Get in line." Yamamoto picked up a metal tray from a stack near the entrance. It was stamped with U.S. Army markings, slightly dented but clean. The weight of it felt strange in his hands. Real, solid. The line shuffled forward, and he found himself standing before the serving counter, staring at food he couldn't quite process. The first server, a heavy, set corporal with sweat stains under his arms, used tongues to place something on Yamamoto's tray. It was a sandwich, but not like any sandwich he'd seen before. 2 pieces of soft white bread, toasted golden, with a thick patty of ground meat between them. Juice from the meat ran across the bun. A slice of yellow cheese melted over the top, and there were red and green things. Tomato and lettuce. His mind supplied after a moment of confusion. A hamburger. He'd heard of them. American food. Common food. What factory workers ate. The next server added a mound of mashed potatoes, white and steaming, with a pat of butter melting into a golden pool in the center. Then green beans. Then a slice of bread with more butter. Then a piece of pie with a latticed crust and dark filling. Yamamoto stood there, frozen, until the corporal said something in English and made a gentle shooing motion. "Move along." At the end of the line, a different soldier handed him a glass bottle, beaded with condensation. The liquid inside was dark brown, almost black, with bubbles rising through it. A red and white label wrapped around the center. Coca-Cola. He'd seen Coca-Cola once, in a photograph from Shanghai before the war. An expensive American luxury. Something for officers and rich men. They were giving it to prisoners. Yamamoto carried his tray to the nearest table and sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Around him, the other prisoners were doing the same, each man moving as if in a dream, their faces blank with incomprehension. Hideo sat across from him, staring at his hamburger like it might bite him first. As it poisoned, someone whispered in Japanese, "Don't be stupid." Another voice answered, "Why waste poison on us? Then why?" The first voice couldn't finish the question. One of the guards, the young one who'd met them at the train, walked to the center of the room. The translator followed. "This is your evening meal," the translator announced. "Standard rations for U.S. Army personnel. You'll eat 3 meals a day, same as this. If you're still hungry, there's more. Just ask. Still hungry? More." Yamamoto picked up the hamburger with both hands. It was warm. The meat smelled rich and fatty, seasoned with salt and pepper and something else he couldn't name. His stomach cramped with hunger so intense it was almost painful. He hadn't eaten meat, real meat, not fish or the stringy horse meat they'd sometimes gotten on Saipan in over a year. He bit down. The flavors exploded across his tongue. The beef was juicy, cooked through but still tender, the char on the outside giving it a smoky depth. The cheese was creamy and sharp. The bread was soft, pillowy, nothing like the hard biscuits or rice that had sustained him for years. The tomato was fresh, acidic, cutting through the richness. The lettuce added a crisp coolness. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. No, that wasn't quite right. It wasn't about taste. It was about what the taste meant. Yamamoto took another bite, then another, eating mechanically now, his jaw working while his mind reeled. Around him, other prisoners were doing the same. Some ate slowly, reverently. Others devoured their meals like starving dogs. The artillery sergeant ate, with tears streaming down his face, not making a sound, his shoulders shaking. Hideo hadn't touched his food. He was staring at Yamamoto with wide, frightened eyes. "What's wrong?" Yamamoto asked, his mouth still half full. "They're feeding us like this?" Hideo said quietly. "Like we're people." Yamamoto set down the hamburger. Half of it was gone already. His stomach felt fuller than it had in months, and there was still mashed potatoes and beans and pie, and that mysterious bottle of Coca-Cola. "We are people," Yamamoto said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them, because he understood what Hideo meant. They had surrendered. They had failed the emperor. They had violated Bushido by choosing captivity over death. According to everything they'd been taught, they were worse than animals. They were living corpses, men without honor. And yet here they sat, eating hamburgers. Yamamoto picked up the Coca-Cola bottle. The cap was still on. He looked around and saw some prisoners struggling with theirs, until one of the guards demonstrated using the edge of the table to pop it off. The cap clattered to the floor with a small metallic sound. Yamamoto brought the bottle to his lips and drank. The carbonation hit first, a sharp, fizzing sensation that stung Yamamoto's lips and tongue. Then came the sweetness, overwhelming and strange, like nothing he'd ever experienced. Not like sugar in tea or the rare piece of candy from before the war. This was different, aggressive. The bubbles filled his mouth and throat, and he coughed, eyes watering. It was wonderful. He took another drink, more carefully this time, letting the cold liquid slide down his throat. The sweetness mixed with something bitter, something almost medicinal but pleasant. His head felt light. He looked at the bottle again, at the English words he couldn't read, at the elegant script of the Coca-Cola logo. This was what American workers drank. Common laborers, Factory hands. The people who built the ships and tanks and planes that were, even now, grinding Japan into dust. Yamamoto set the bottle down and looked at his tray. He'd eaten half the hamburger without thinking, without even tasting it, after the first few bites. The mashed potatoes sat there, still steaming. He picked up his fork. They'd been given real forks, metal ones, and he took a bite. Butter and cream and salt, smooth as silk. Better than anything he'd eaten in a restaurant in Osaka before conscription. Better than the meal his mother had made the night before he'd left for basic training, when she'd spent a week's ration tickets on pork and vegetables to give him a proper send-off. He ate the potatoes. He ate the green beans. He ate the bread. He even ate the pie, though by then his stomach was stretched tight and painful. The pie was apple, sweet and tart, the crust flaking apart under his fork, butter rich and perfect. When he finished, he sat back and stared at his empty tray. Around him, the mess hall had fallen into an eerie quiet. 43 men sat at the tables, most of them finished eating, none of them speaking. The only sounds were the clink of utensils on metal trays, and the quiet sobbing of the artillery sergeant, who'd buried his face in his hands. One of the American servers walked through the tables with a large pot, stopping at each prisoner. "Coffee?" he asked, the word the same in any language. He poured without waiting for an answer, filling tin cups with black coffee. When he reached Yamamoto, he smiled, and said something in English that sounded almost friendly. Yamamoto stared into the coffee cup. Steam rose from it, carrying a bitter, earthy smell. He'd had coffee once, at a Western-style cafe in Tokyo, when he was 17, before the war consumed everything. It had cost him half a day's wages from his job at the textile mill. Here, they poured it freely for prisoners. He didn't touch it. Couldn't touch it. His stomach was full to bursting, and something else was building inside him. A pressure behind his eyes, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the meal. "They're fattening us up," someone said in Japanese. It was the naval officer, a lieutenant junior grade named Nakamura, who still carried himself with rigid military bearing, despite the prisoner's uniform. Before the execution. This is how Americans do it. They make a show of civility first. No one responded. The theory sounded hollow even as Nakamura spoke it. "There's no execution coming," said another voice. Corporal Tanaka, older than most of them, maybe 35, with gray already threading through his hair. He'd been a schoolteacher before the war. Yamamoto had learned during the voyage across the Pacific. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. This is something else. Then what? Hideo asked, his voice cracking. He'd eaten his meal too, though reluctantly unable to resist the hunger. "What is this?" Tanaka looked down at his empty tray. "I think," he said slowly, "this is just how they eat. Every day. All of them." The words settled over the table like fallout. "Impossible," Nakamura said. "America is at war. They have rationing, same as us. They can't possibly—" "Why just ate it?" Tanaka interrupted quietly. "The guard said it was standard rations." "Standard. This is what their soldiers eat, not officers, not generals. Soldiers." Yamamoto thought of his last year on Saipan. Rice twice a day, sometimes only once. Watered-down miso soup with no fish, no tofu. Occasionally, if a supply ship made it through the American submarine blockade, they'd get tinned meat. Mystery meat, they called it, that tasted like old paper and salt. More often, they ate weevil-infested hardtack and whatever they could forage from the jungle. Toward the end, Before the Americans landed, the rations had been cut to starvation levels. Men grew weak. Some died of dysentery, others just faded, and the civilians had it worse, much worse. Back home, Yamamoto said, hearing his own voice as if from a distance, my sister wrote that they're eating acorns, boiling acorns to make flour because there's no rice. Several heads turned toward him. My village stopped getting fish shipments. Hideo added quietly, my mother's last letter said they were rationing to 1 bowl of barley porridge per day. Tokyo's on reduced rations. The signals officer spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse and uncertain. Before I shipped out, civilians were getting 300 grams of rice per day. Maybe less by now. Nakamura's face had gone pale. The war effort requires sacrifice. The homeland supports the military. That's how. Wei got half rations on Saipan. Tanaka interrupted again, his voice harder now. While the Americans, he gestured at the mess hall, at the serving line where the cooks were cleaning their stations, scraping leftover food into waste bins. Perfectly good food, being thrown away. Look at them. They're throwing food away. Food that would feed a family for a week back home. Yamamoto watched an American soldier scrape a partially eaten hamburger into the trash. His hands started to shake. The guard said we'd eat 3 meals like this every day. Hideo whispered, 3 meals. Of this? And if we're still hungry, there's more. Someone else added. He said there's more. The silence returned, heavier than before. Yamamoto felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure opening in the careful mental walls he'd built to survive the war, to survive the capture, to survive the shame. Japan was starving, the homeland was starving, the military was starving, and here, in an enemy prison camp, in the heart of the nation they'd been told was on the verge of collapse. Prisoners, men without honor, men who'd failed their emperor, were eating hamburgers and drinking Coca-Cola and being offered second helpings. That night, Yamamoto lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. The barracks were warm, heated by a coal furnace that rumbled in the corner, tended by an American private who'd shown them how to adjust the damper. Each prisoner had been given 2 wool blankets, a pillow with a clean white case, and a mattress that, while thin, was infinitely better than the bare wooden platforms or muddy ground they'd slept on for months. Through the window, he could see electric lights burning in other barracks, in the guard towers, along the pathways. Electricity, running all night, as if it cost nothing. On Saipan, they'd had 1 generator for the entire battalion, and fuel for it had been so scarce they only ran it for emergencies. Hideo was crying quietly in the bunk below. Not the first time. He'd broken down after lights out, curled on his side, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. No one said anything. Several other men were crying too. Yamamoto's eyes were dry, but only because he felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything he'd once believed. The next morning, after another meal that might as well have come from a dream, pancakes with butter and syrup, scrambled eggs, bacon, milk, orange juice, more coffee, they were assembled in the recreation hall. A different officer addressed them, a captain with graying temples and a wedding ring on his left hand. The translator, the same Nisi corporal from yesterday, conveyed his words. Gentlemen, under the Geneva Convention, you have the right to send letters to your families in Japan. The International Red Cross will deliver them. You may write once per month. Your letters will be censored for military information, but personal messages will be allowed. Paper and pencils are available at that table. Yamamoto stared at the table where neat stacks of paper sat beside coffee cans full of sharpened pencils, writing supplies. Just sitting there, free. You don't have to write, the translator continued. But if you wish to let your families know you're alive and well, this is your opportunity. Most of the men moved toward the table. Yamamoto found himself among them, though he wasn't sure what he would say. What could he say? How could he explain any of this? He sat at one of the long tables with a sheet of paper in front of him and a pencil in his hand. The paper was clean, white, unlined, better quality than what most schools in Japan had. He stared at it for long minutes, then began to write. Dear Mother and Chiyoko, I am alive and uninjured. I have been taken prisoner by American forces and am being held at a camp in a place called Wisconsin. I am being treated well. He stopped. The pencil hovered over the paper. Treated well. Such inadequate words. Such a monstrous understatement. Around him, other men were writing, their faces intense with concentration. Some wrote quickly, filling the page with urgent characters. Others, like Yamamoto, kept stopping, staring at their words, crossing things out. We receive 3 meals per day, he continued. The food is adequate. Adequate. He almost laughed. The breakfast he'd eaten an hour ago would have fed his entire family for 2 days. But how could he write that? How could he tell his mother, who was boiling acorns for flour, that he was eating bacon and pancakes? How could he tell his sister that he, a failed soldier, a man without honor, was living better than she was? I hope you are both healthy. Please do not worry about me. I am safe here. Safe. In an enemy prison camp, while Japan burned. He signed his name and folded the letter before he could think better of it. A guard collected it, placed it in an envelope, and marked it for processing. That afternoon, they were taken on a tour of the camp. So you know the layout, the translator explained. Know where things are. The commandant believes informed prisoners are cooperative prisoners. They saw the infirmary, a full medical building with examining rooms, a pharmacy stocked with medications, even a small surgical suit. The doctor on duty, an army major, explained through the translator that any prisoner requiring medical attention would receive it immediately. No exceptions. They saw the library, shelves of books in English, some in Japanese, donated by the Red Cross. Reading material for prisoners. They saw the workshop where prisoners could learn carpentry, metalwork, or other trades. To keep you occupied, the translator said. Idleness is bad for morale. They saw the recreation yard with volleyball nets and baseball equipment. You can organize games if you wish. Exercise is encouraged. And they saw the warehouse. It was a large building near the camp's entrance, guarded but not heavily. Through the open doors, Yamamoto glimpsed stacks of supplies that made his breath catch. Crates of food, hundreds of them. Boxes marked with labels he couldn't read but could guess at. Sacks of flour and sugar piled higher than a man's head. Cartons of cigarettes. Cases of Coca-Cola stacked in pyramids. Supply depot for the camp, the translator said casually. And for the base nearby, one building, one warehouse, containing more food than Yamamoto's entire village had seen in a year. Corporal Tanaka, walking beside him, made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. We've already lost, Tanaka whispered in Japanese, quiet enough that only those nearest could hear. Haven't we? We lost before it even started. Nakamura, the naval officer who'd clung to his rigid certainty, didn't answer. But his face had gone slack, the military bearing finally crumbling. He was staring at the warehouse like a man watching his world collapse. That evening, After another meal that none of them could quite process, roast chicken this time, with stuffing and gravy and cranberry sauce, Yamamoto sat in the barracks' common room. Some men played cards. Others read or wrote letters. The artillery sergeant, who they'd learned was named Kimura, sat by the window smoking a cigarette. American cigarettes, given freely, a pack per week for any prisoner who wanted them. Kimura had stopped crying. Instead, he'd grown very quiet, very still, like a man who'd seen something he could never unsee. "I was at Guadalcanal," Kimura said suddenly, to no one in particular. "Before Saipan. We were starving there too. Toward the end, we called it Starvation Island. Men died of hunger more than bullets." He took a drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing in the gathering dusk. "We found American positions they'd abandoned. There were cases of rations left behind. Just left there, in the jungle. We thought it was a miracle. We fought over those cans of food like animals." Several men had stopped what they were doing, listening. "There was so much," Kimura continued, his voice distant. "Canned peaches, chocolate, crackers, meat, cigarettes. We couldn't understand why they'd left it. Later we realized they left it because they had so much more. It was easier to abandon it than carry it. They could afford to waste it." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We were dying for food they threw away." Yamamoto thought of the mess hall, of the garbage bins filled with half-eaten meals, with scraps that would have kept a soldier alive for days on Saipan. His hands clenched into fists. "My brother is in the Philippines," Hideo said quietly from his chair. "He wrote before I was captured. Said they were eating grass. Boiling leather. Men were dying of beriberi because there was no rice, no nutrition." His voice cracked. "And I'm here eating pie, apple pie, with ice cream. They'd been given ice cream that afternoon. Vanilla ice cream, served after lunch as if it were nothing. As if frozen cream and sugar were so abundant they could give it to prisoners on a Wednesday afternoon in September." "It's not just the food," Tanaka said. He'd been reading an American newspaper, 6 months old, but the guards allowed them to read outdated papers. He held it up, showing a page of advertisements. "Look at this. Advertisements for automobiles, for washing machines, for electric refrigerators." He pointed to one image. "This company is apologizing that they can't make cars right now because the factories are making tanks. Apologizing to customers, because everyone apparently expects to own a car. My father never owned a car," someone said. "He was a shopkeeper, successful. Never even considered it. The guard told me." Tanaka continued that before the war, America was making 4 million automobiles every year. 4 million in 1 year. He set down the paper. "No, those factories make tanks and planes. Thousands of them. They converted civilian abundance into military abundance." Yamamoto stood and walked to the window. Outside, in the guard tower, an American soldier sat reading a book, a thermos of coffee beside him. Young, maybe 19. He'd probably eaten the same meal the prisoners had. To him, it was just Wednesday dinner. Nothing special. Certainly nothing to cry about. "We can't win," Yamamoto said aloud, finally speaking the thought that had been growing since that first bite of hamburger. "We never could. This isn't about courage or fighting spirit or the Emperor's will. It's about this." He gestured around them. "The food, the electricity, the medicine, the supplies. They have so much they can afford to give it to their enemies. The homeland can still fight," Nakamura said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The spirit of Japan will starve," Corporal Tanaka interrupted flatly. Spirit doesn't stop bullets. It doesn't build planes. And it doesn't fill empty stomachs. He stood, facing Nakamura directly. We were told America was weak, soft, that their men wouldn't fight, that their economy was collapsing, that they didn't have the will or the resources for a long war. Everything we were told was a lie. It was a lie that comforted the men who sent us to die. Kimura added. His cigarette burned down to the filter. The generals knew. They had to know. Maybe not how much abundance America had, but they knew we couldn't win a long war. And they sent us anyway. Silence fell over the room. Outside, the electric lights buzzed. The furnace rumbled. Somewhere in another barracks, someone was playing a harmonica, an American tune, learned from the guards. Yamamoto returned to his bunk and pulled out another sheet of paper. He'd been given 5 sheets, told he could write more letters if he wanted, just not to send them until next month's allocation. But he needed to write this now, needed to put words to the realization that was crushing him. Dear Mother and Chiyoko, I am writing a second letter, though I cannot send it yet. Perhaps I will never send it. I don't know if I can tell you these things, but I need to write them. The Americans feed us 3 meals a day, real meals. Meat, vegetables, bread, milk. More food than I ever ate as a civilian. More food than you are eating now, I think. Certainly more than the soldiers are eating, fighting in the Philippines or Burma, or wherever the war has spread. They give this food to prisoners, men who fought against them, men they would be justified in hating, and they do it casually, as if it costs them nothing. Because I think, Mother, it does cost them almost nothing. I think they have so much that feeding a few thousand enemy prisoners is barely noticeable. I saw a warehouse yesterday. One warehouse. It had more food than our entire village, and the guard said it was just for this camp, just for us and the nearby base. One small place in the middle of America, in a state I'd never heard of. Mother, we cannot win this war. I know I shouldn't write that. I know it's defeatist, traitorous even, but it's true. We're fighting a nation that gives ice cream to prisoners. Do you understand what that means? He stopped writing, his hand shaking. The pencil point had broken, pressing too hard against the paper. He set it down and folded the letter, tucking it under his thin pillow. He would never send it. Couldn't send it. The censors would never allow it through. And even if they did, what good would it do? His mother couldn't stop the war. His sister couldn't feed the hungry. The truth wouldn't change anything. But Yamamoto knew it now, carried it like a stone in his chest. Japan had lost the war the moment it began. Not because Japanese soldiers lacked courage or skill. Not because of inferior tactics or bad leadership, though those played their parts. Japan lost because it had challenged a nation that could afford to be generous to its enemies. A nation so wealthy, so productive, so impossibly abundant that it could fight a 2-front war across 2 oceans, while its civilians complained about butter rationing and its prisoners ate better than most of the world. It wasn't the ships or the planes or the bombs that had truly defeated Japan. It was the simple, devastating reality of a hamburger and a Coca-Cola. It was the casual abundance that represented an industrial capacity so vast, so overwhelming, that no amount of fighting spirit could overcome it. Yamamoto lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow there would be breakfast, probably more eggs, more bacon, more coffee. Then lunch, then dinner. 3 meals, every day regular as sunrise. His body would grow stronger. His wounds would heal. He would survive the war in comfort and safety while his countrymen starved and died. and he would carry this knowledge like a wound that never healed. The war was lost, had always been lost, and the proof was in the taste of a meal that America considered ordinary. Outside, the Wisconsin wind picked up, rattling the windows. In the guard tower, the young American soldier turned a page of his book and sipped his coffee, unaware that he and his hamburger had broken something in 40, 3 men that no bullet ever could. The truth of an unwinnable war served on a metal tray. A hamburger and a Coca-Cola. That's all it took to shatter the illusion. But here's what they don't tell you. Some of these prisoners never went home. Even after Japan surrendered, they chose to stay in America. Why? What did they know that made them abandon everything? Subscribe to WW2 Forgotten 45, where we tell the stories that textbooks left out. And drop a comment below. What's the one World War II question you've always wanted answered? We might just cover it next.